Hello, 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 hello. I am Grandmaster Boros, and you are watching the Chess Sweep channel. So, as you might expect from the title, and just it's in the air, we're going to talk about Pillsbury. Now, Pillsbury is a fantastic player, and I did ask around in previous lectures and times, do you know Harry Nelson Pillsbury? And I've got mixed responses. Not what I wanted. But we're going to catch up and know more about him. Now, Harry Nelson Pillsbury is one of those players, yet again, of the long list of players who didn't become world champion. Did he get a chance? Almost. He almost got the chance, but he passed away way too early to get there. Also, just like Breyer, who invented some interesting systems, this knight b8, knight d7 in the Spanish, just didn't make it. He was actually dominating in the early 1900s, and if he was to live longer, probably he would have made it to the World Championship title. But it did not happen. So, without any further ado, let's even get into the game. The first one I want to show is his game against Marco. Yep, this will be about Pillsbury. Yep, and his game against Marco. Now, the Pillsbury attack is fantastic for many reasons. One of the reasons is that this was the opening that won 1895 Hastings for Pillsbury. You might ask, but hey, that was just a tournament. What are you talking about? It's just an event. Now, we're in 2020. You might think that, okay, I can play anywhere, everywhere, online, on the internet, wherever. Now, that wasn't the case in 1895. You've got to be invited to play. Also, travel expenses, even more expensive than now in the 2020s. So if you wonder, this was a big deal, let me point out who played in this tournament. So Pillsbury won with 16.5 out of 21 games. They no longer even play that long in World Championship matches these days. Michal Chigorin is second with 16, so pretty close. Emanuel Lasker, Siegbert Tarasch, Steinitz, Schiffers, Bardaleben, Blackburn. So many great players. Bird and Gunsberg. And the back of the pack, and Tinsley and Vergani. Not even talking about Mieses. So legendary players. So for a good reason, thought the chess world that this is going to be a big deal. And I can say something which is kind of special. If Pillsbury did not invent or didn't come up with this spectacular idea, which we're going to peruse and look about, probably he wouldn't win the Hastings Open. Actually, not sure if it's an Open, but the Hastings event. So let's take a look at this game. This was actually played a bit later, but it is the same concept that Pillsbury used in Hastings 1895. D4. The good old Queen's Gambit. The traditional QGD, which you've seen on the 1900s and later on as well. Now, Pillsbury wasn't only known for this attack that he invented. He's also known to be a prolific simultaneous player and exhibitionist, really good at blindfold chess, and so good that he actually inspired a young Cuban boy to attend and start picking up chess. Can you guess the name of that young talent? Obviously, it was Capablanca. Yep, it was Capa. So he was very influential. In fact, because of him, a future world champion adopts chess. Knight f6, bishop g5. Modern times they take on d5, e takes, bishop g5, and these are some classical structures where white is hoping to play with the Isolani. Minority attack, that is. Excuse me. But Pillsbury plays bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, knight f3, b6, bishop d3, takes, c takes d5. It's very interesting. I heard rumors that whenever they play b6, there's always an idea that you should look for with white, and that is to fix the structure for black. There were times they took, and played bishop d3, and in this case, black is saddened with this type of pawn structure. In fact, you've seen something very similar in the Fischer-Spassky matches. But he played bishop d3, bishop b7, c takes d5, e takes d5. Probably e takes d5 is not so great. Why? Because it kind of closes in this bishop. I would have preferred knight takes d5, takes, castles, and black has decent enough counterplay even though white will get the central control. E takes d5, and this is a typical way of playing. On the other hand, this bishop is just very bad. Knight e5, and here it comes. The big and legendary maneuver by Pillsbury. Knight e5, knight d7, f4. So let's stop here and think about what has white achieved. First off, white has a wonderful pony on e5, which is overprotected. So when I'm trying to refute ideas, and let's just jump at it, let's try to refute the idea of the Pillsbury attack. So once your opponent plunks a knight on e5, how can you get rid of it? Chat, as this is going to be an interactive session, I do hope that you'll contribute a little bit. So let's think about this. The knight is on e5. How can we boot that horse? If we can't do that, the situation might not be that good for white. Dortam is saying knight e8, f6. Okay, that's a first thought. Let's think about other options. Is knight e8 the only way to boot it? So knight e8, f6 is an interesting way of playing, trying to just get rid of this knight. But can we put this knight to better square than e8? So we recognize that this knight is super dangerous. It often attacks this square, puts pressure on this pony. So if we can get rid of it, we'd love to do so. Now we don't want to take it because fe, even de can be dangerous. But after fe, white gets an open file and a clear target on h7. And Marco doesn't want to do that. So knight e5 is not really an option here. Knight e8, f6 is interesting, but do we have a better place for this knight than this square on e8? Knight e4, yes, of course. So knight e4 would have been a very interesting idea. Because A, you force off the bishops, which is not a bad deal. B, you are preparing f6. Let's say castles, then there's f6. Now you might ask me, with a good reason, but f6, isn't that a weakening move? And indeed it is. But at least you get rid of this monstrous knight on e5. Because once that knight moves, this pawn becomes a weakness, and let's say takes. The situation sort of changes. In fact, it's black who has a Pillsbury knight, which is lording down the board and putting some pressure on c3, and sometimes you can even attack that e3 pawn. So what's kind of fascinating, that this can turn out to be a fight between the Pillsbury knights. And if black manages to get rid of this one on e5, then his knight on e4 or her knight on e4 will become the legendary one. I mean, in this case, white would take the chance to take it and get rid of it, but probably this position would just be fairly even. But the whole point was that black should be aiming to go knight e4 and f6 just to boot that e5 knight, because it's dangerous. But okay, let's give credit to Marco, because this was a novel concept. He had no idea he's facing danger. c5. And here, Pillsbury played a very strong move, which is always important, and I always advise people who are learning chess to do so. Whenever your king is in the center, you've got to castle. Just put the king into safety. c4, bishop c2. And here, black decides to prepare this b5 move. In fact, not such a great plan. It's a little bit slow. But we have to prove it. So let's try to think with Pillsbury's brains. We already have a magnificent knight on e5. We just need to come up with some plans to attack. Let's think about it, chat. So where will be the weak spot? Which spot will be the weakest in black's position? h7 pawn. You already have a bishop on it. We sort of have some trickies, because this knight is exerting pressure on this knight, and this bishop is exerting pressure on this pony. So we are pretty close to breaking through. Now, I saw rook f3, rook h3. That's an idea. Or queen f3, queen h3. And the big question is the following. Which one would you choose and why? Chess, as you might know, is the question of making a decision. Deciding to go this way, but you have to formulate an opinion, a logical opinion, why you do so. Why would you go queen f3, h3? Or conversely, rook f3, h3? Well, the queen cannot really go to h5 just yet, because the knight is covering that square. So that is not really a possibility, because it's heavily defended. So first off, we have these two plans of going queen f3, h3, or rook f3, rook h3. It's all good that we have plans, but what could black do to throw in a spanner in the works? How can black try to stop us? In fact, we talked about that concept before. Meanwhile, I hydrate. Dirke with knight d4. And indeed, if knight e4 is coming, how can we continue with our plans and avoid knight d4 from throwing a spanner? And that's right. Queen f3 is the move, because if you go rook f3, black can and should go knight e4, and no longer will you have those ideas. Also note that black starts attacking everything. This is well defended. It has two defenders, two attackers. That means the e4 is defended. Let's say takes, takes. And as I told you before, f6 might become an issue for white, as once this knight has to leave, the situation is not as good as it was before for Pillsbury. So knight e4 would have been annoying. Seeing that, Pillsbury decides to play queen f3, stopping this idea. Because in this case, I have three defenders. Here, takes, takes, takes. And I'm just up a pawn for not much. In fact, I should take here first. Takes, 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 takes. And f6 usually wins something because you can't move the knight. But there's this little check, and after knight takes c4, white is just completely winning. So therefore, queen f3 is a multi-purpose move. Not only does it stop Marco from landing a knight on e4, it also prepares queen h3, mounting pressure on the h7 pawn. But actually, that's not the only square that queen f3 is trying to attack. One of them is knight c4. So if you just play something random, rook e8, there's this knight takes c4 tricky because you can't take back. There's queen takes b7 and you're down a pawn, and I also have got the bishop pair. So Marco has to go b5 over defending, also hoping to play b4. Now once we get to queen h3, let's think about that for a second. What are we threatening after queen h3? And that's very important. It's not enough just to know maneuvers, you also have to know about your threats. So what is queen h3 threatening? And of course it was played. Think about these critical squares. What's on Pillsbury's mind? It's tricky. It's super tricky. But these positions do get very, very tricky. Yep, black would get overloaded. Let's say if black plays this really bad move, rook e8, I have knight takes d7. White will be playing against this h7 pawn. So knight takes d7, removing a defender. If you take with the knight, you get mated on h8, queen h7, and queen h8 checkmate. And if you take on d7, there's a pretty little tactical shot that makes this a beautiful, beautiful solution here. White to move and win. It is sneakalicious, but pretty. Yep. Bishop takes h7. Check. You can capture back. Your queen is en prise. And if you move the king, I can go back, and my attack is still raging. So Marco had to deal with all of this and decides to go g6. But what if black decides, went g6 here. But what if black decides to play h6? Can black get away with such a move? Not really, because there's this sacrifice on h6. Gh, queen takes h6, and the problems are manifold. Not only does white threaten this idea of checkmate, now not at the moment, but he's also threatening to go rook f3, rook g3, checkmating. Or rook h3, queen h8, checkmate. So here, virtually bishop takes h6 would win the game on the spot. Gh, queen h6, and it's basically checkmate. And because of this monster knight, these knights are paralyzed. They can't really move around that much. And rook f3 and rook h3 is just coming too fast. So Marco played g6. Seemingly the end of the attack. But it ain't the case. How can we crash on through? Also, let's think about it strategically. So it's good that we're finding moves, but what are we aiming to achieve with those moves? It's very important to have that inner talk of goals. You need to know why you're playing a move. A move by in itself doesn't win you a game. A move that has a concept wins you a game. And that's actually Harry Nelson Pillsbury's really takeaway. His chess is based on concepts. And that's why he was such a great player. f5 opens the king somewhat. Okay. What is f5 achieving? What are you trying to do after playing f5? Because it's one thing that it does attack the king. That is a true statement. Give a concept. What are you trying to achieve after that? So f5, it's logical. Probably want to take. And what are you going to do afterwards? What idea would pop into mind? f5 was played, by the way. Just mounting pressure on the king. Rook f4. Dirke, what's your idea behind rook f4? Interesting move. Just wondering what is your concept. Rook h4. Very interesting. In fact, I played a similar plan against Christian Chirilla. And I had a nice attacking game against him where I used this rook f4, rook h4 idea. Yeah, that is very dangerous. Good one, Dirke. What else can white do apart from rook f4, rook h4? Always look for more and more ideas, because in this way you enrich yourself and then you have more concepts and patterns to work with. So rook f4, rook h4 is one of them. F takes, H takes. I don't see the mate, Boxar. So just taking on G6, black will definitely take back. No question about it. So again, let's play again this kind of suspicious rook e8 move. You want to take. How can you continue here? So sometimes it's okay just to make like these dummy test moves and see if there's some tactical shots and ideas that we can capitalize on. Catch Kellerman says maybe knight takes g6, takes, and rook f3, rook g3. Exactly. Now this is a typical sacrifice shattering black's structure. And also it's not that bad if you count pawns. You get 2 pawns for a piece, so you're only 1 pawn down, and you also have a raging attack. So in fact, this is a very, very good idea, Catch Kellerman. You might even consider knight takes f7. King takes f7. It's kind of luring the king closer to the white pieces. And here's a very nice little move that would facilitate the attack. Can you find it, dear chat and viewers? Yep, queen h7 check. So it's a taboo, you can't take it. King e6, queen takes g6, and there's just too much pressure on the black king. White has a raging attack. It's understandable that Marco didn't want any of these and decided to go b4. Now, note that our pony is attacked. Will Harry Nelson defend that pony? That is the big question. I think this is sort of a yes and no question. Chat, what's your opinion? Will he defend it or not? No, says Lulaman. Never. Okay? So if we're not going to defend it, how can we compensate being a piece down? I guess checkmating is a good compensation. So obviously he took on g6. Now bc is not the best option here, because you can take here, capture, boom, rook takes f6. And if h takes g6, there's a very, very elegant solution for white. White to move and win. Indeed. Bishop takes g6. Pow! Problem is, for black, if you take on f6, there's queen h7 checkmate. And if you take with the pawn, you get checkmated this way. And again, the Pillsbury knight stops this king from escaping to a better land. You mentioned instead of fg knight e2, this is an interesting maneuver, but the time is now, so you've got to act accordingly and at this moment. Also, bc takes, the point of this sacrifice was if bishop f6, there's checkmate on h7. fg, you can do the same thing, but actually there's this added beauty. If you take here, f takes, and checkmate this way. So he decides not to take on c3 because this is just a huge checkmate. So he takes it back. Takes the pawn back. And if you're familiar with chess history and familiar with ideas from Fischer games, this might not be that hard to solve. This king is actually sort of weak on dark squares. So if we can conquer those dark squares, we'll be checkmating. So let's try to find out what Pillsbury was trying to achieve after f takes g6. So obviously, knight e2, knight f4 is a maneuver that makes sense. Just bringing more pieces, it's logical, and it is strategically very sound, Dirke. On the other hand, many of black's pieces are really passive, and those heavy pieces is like a garage sale, they're doing absolutely nothing. So, if we can activate our guys and find a mating pattern. Probably we can crash through early on. So whenever you're looking for a tactical shot, always imagine a checkmate pattern. Where would you imagine that checkmate pattern to happen? Where would the mate land? Where would the mate land? And that's very important. Emmerich says H8. Anybody else? What squares do you think is the critical one? F6 or H8. Although you won't get mated on F6. Definitely not. Most likely on H8 though. Or G7. That's also a possibility. Now, if we know that the mate is probably going to arrive on H8, there's at least two ways to get there. Sphinxy mentioned one, rook f4, rook h4 is an interesting idea. And then trying for rook h8. But then again, queen h6 would be the checkmate. How else can we get a typical queen h8 checkmate going? In fact, that's not a queen h8 checkmate. So just remember, you cannot checkmate with the queen alone. The lady needs some helpers. Can we find a helper? A Santa's little helper to help us checkmate? Well, yes, the bishop on g5 will be our little helper. And if we know that the bishop on g5 will be the culprit, you already know what to do there. How can we put pressure with this bishop? So we have some pressure on d7, the bishop on e7, and the knight on f6. Now, can the bishop on e7 move around a lot? Not really. Queen h4? Yes, queen h4. And in fact, it was played. So Pillsbury is mounting huge pressure on the f6 knight and indirectly on the bishop on e7. So white is pressing on f6. Black's move was b takes c3. But now we need to decide how can we facilitate our attack. Go on. So we already know that this bishop is undefended. Knight takes d7, yes, very good. Queen takes d7, can't take with the knight because bishop e7 and it's all over. Queen takes d7, and here's the big moment. The moment of truth. Rook takes f6. And just a little bit of a pop quiz. Do you remember the Fischer game where rook f6 was the big move? Very important to remember, because these are the patterns that can guide you in your future games. Any ideas? So rook takes f6 was played. The point is you can capture takes because there's mate on h8 and you can defend it. Black is being overpowered here. Rook f6, a5, thinking that everything's fine. Not. So, as you see, a5 doesn't really do too much. Bishop f6 is not a threat because we can take and just mate. So, if you're going for the attack and you need not risk too much. So in general, whenever you're going for an attack, you must be precise. But as you've seen by this a5 move, it just doesn't do much. So if your opponent plays a5, does it give you an opportunity to bring more reinforcements for the game? Wow, rook f7, that looks a little bit dicey. What if I just capture back? If takes, I just take, and a rook is a rook. And don't forget, you have a dominating position. You don't want to throw it all away. You want to keep it in control. Bishop takes. Okay, and if I take back? Well, probably you can try this and takes here and queen h5 with rook d6 ideas. But Pillsbury decides to go rook a f1. Why is rook a f1 a little bit better than bishop takes g6? Well, for the reason that a5 didn't do much. So it actually gave Harry Nelson an extra time to develop more pieces for the attack. Now bishop g6 is probably winning as well. But why risk it when you have an extra free move that you can make? Rook a6, thinking that everything's alright. Nope, it ain't. So it's white to move and win. And as you might imagine, this is just not a one-move puzzle. Yes, bishop g6 is the first move. What if I take back? So bishop takes g6, let's continue. That's a good start. So whenever you're trying to solve puzzles, you can't just say, oh, check a move. You've got to provide evidence. In this way, chess is very close to math. If you can't prove it, you don't have it. Okay, if rook f7, what if I take back? You give up a whole rook. You've better have good evidence that you're winning here. Your problem, no patience? Yeah, patience is important. So here, you know, try to prove it. If you can prove it, it might just be there. So bishop takes g6 was played, that's correct. Probably even rook f7 is winning because Pillsbury's position is dominating already. So f takes g6, and this is the big question. Seemingly the attack died down, but here comes the genius, the tactical genius of Pillsbury. It's white to move and win. It's spectacular. So whenever you're looking at these kind of puzzles, always notice which pieces are loose for your opponent. Which of the pieces for black are loose? Viewers, chat, any opinions about loose pieces? Let's be methodical. Let's point them out. So what are the loose pieces for black? Let me start. One of the loose pieces are the bishop on e7. But there's more. The queen is unprotected, yes. And I'm not just asking just to ask questions. These are important. Without that, you'll never know the solution. So if you know that this queen is unprotected, how can we come closer to that queen? So obviously we've got to take on f8. Bishop takes f8. And seemingly it's done. There's nothing going on. But there's a catch. There's a catch. Boom. Rook takes f8. And now we need to find out why is this such a big deal. If king g7, obviously it's mate in 1. And again, talking about the mating pattern, it returns. So king takes f8 is the only move. And now we have to calculate. Queen h8 check. King f7 only move. How can we capture the data? Queen h7 check. What if I defend the lady from e8? So here, only move. Can't move there. Check. King e8. Queen g8 is mate, which is kind of pretty. Now this queen is again in the way, and therefore it's checkmate. So black needs to find a different way. So can try to defend the queen from e6. But then sadly, queen g6 mates. And again, the queen is in the way. So in both cases, the queen was in the way. This is okay, you're not getting mated, but you lose the queen. And this is how Pillsbury won. So he used the fact that he had a monstrous knight, way more active pieces. Monstrous knight on e5, well supported, and then he mounted a huge attack with this queen h4, rook takes f6 idea, and with pressure on e7. Now, whenever I mentioned that Fischer game, rook f6 was played in the famous Fischer-Banco game. DK is saying, it's funny, but these kind of queen checkmates are very hard to calculate in advance. Yes, it is. So, don't forget, this was the 1900s. Exactly 1900, when he played this against Marco. And he had no engine. He had one engine up here. And he calculated this long sequence of sacrifices. So he calculated this all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 moves ahead. So if you're saying Pillsbury wasn't Grandmaster level, you must be out of your mind. Because he calculated this when this was the 1900s. He never had a pocket Turk. Because that would have been pretty expensive too. Also, it was a dude in the Turk. So, Did he go mad? There's rumors there, so it's not exactly clear why he got mad. But this was definitely a mad calculation from his part. And again, a big win for the Pillsbury attack. But this is not the only game that I wanted to show. In fact, this one, again, is an important one. Straight from Hastings 1895. The game that actually was quite important. These wins propelled him to win the whole event in front of the greats such as Chigorin, Lasker, Tarash, and Steinitz. In fact, this game is played against Tarash himself. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. So this game is played in 1895, the event that made Pillsbury a superstar and a prodigious player. d4, d5, again, a very classical system. The Queen's Gambit, the orthodox, bishop g5, rook c1, all fairly standard, and c takes d5. And, this is the good move. C takes d5, and sort of Pillsbury follows the principle. Whenever his opponent plays b6, he takes on d5. Making sure that Black will have a quite bad structure. Also note that this is even more precise than in the game between Marco. Here, Black can't take on d5. Has to take with the pawn. Why not? Well, if you take here, I take here, I have a double attack on c7. You can't take on g5 because of that. And if you take on d5, I take, and you drop a pawn on c7. Therefore, Tarash is forced to get this structure, which is, as we know, slightly favorable for white. Bishop d3, bishop b7, castle, c5, and you'll never guess what Harry Pillsbury played in this position. You'd never guess it, because it wasn't knight e5. He played rook e1, c4, bishop b1, a6, and the culprit, is coming. Knight e5 jump is coming. Now, you can tell that Taras, after we watched the game, is a better player than Marco, as he's going to find the concept, which actually is sort of the antidote against the Pillsbury attack. Do you guys remember what was the antidote we talked about earlier on against the Pillsbury attack? How can you play against the Pillsbury attack? Let's try to remember. Remembering is important. Yep. You want to create a monster of your own. You want to have your own Pillsbury knight on e4. Now it doesn't work at the moment because the c4 pawn is hanging. Therefore, Taras solidifies his center and then we'll go for knight e4 breaks. f4, rook e8, queen f3, knight f8. But again, Pillsbury is a very thematic player. He knows that Taras is trying to play knight e4, so he over-defends that square. Knight f8. But because he doesn't feel that he has enough against the h7 square, because of this knight on f8, he decides to go for a different plan, which sort of allows knight e4. What did Pillsbury play in this position? Any ideas? Also, just a side note on knight f8, there was a famous player, the great Dane, who said, if you have a knight on f8, you'll never ever get checkmated. And he wasn't wrong, by the way. He wasn't wrong. It was Larsen, of course, Mr. Bent Larsen. So if queen h3 doesn't work, how can we activate some pieces? Can we get a piece on f5? Would that be an option? If it's an option, how can we get that piece there? h4 would kind of entomb the bishop on g5. That's the issue with that move. Yep, knight e2, knight g3, knight f5. And in fact, this is some of those deals and dealios with this type of structures. It's a lot more positional and maneuvering than you might expect it to be. So Pillsbury, realizing that he's not going to checkmate with queen h3 with a knight defending the h7 square, so he's ditching that plan and goes for knight e2, knight g3, and knight f5. Knight e2, but Taras knows how to do the anti-Pillsbury and goes knight e4. And knight e4 is good for two reasons. Not only he gets his own knight on e4, getting his own Pillsbury knight, but he also prepares an idea. What is the big threat? Dear chat, what is Taras threatening? Queen takes was also an option, obviously. Takes e7. He is planning f6. Now f6 is an ugly move in general, but this knight is so strong on e5, it is actually something you might want to do. Isn't it unwise to abandon plans, says a Gyodor? Okay, so let me answer that question. At this moment, the idea of attacking this way looks attractive. But after knight f8, there's no checkmate. So if there's no checkmate, queen h3 is pointless. That's why Pillsbury abandons the plan. knight e2. So he comes up with a different plan. Knight e4 takes, rook takes e7, f6 is coming. Bishop takes e4, d takes e4. Now bishop e4 is a very strong move. Chet, can you tell me why bishop e4 is such a great move? Well, bishop e4 is great for the following reasons. Are we going to checkmate on h7? Yes, no, maybe? Definitely not. So, is this bishop good for anything at all? Nope. It does absolutely nada. Right, Lord Blizza. The bishop is doing zilch. So, compared to this knight, which is just lording down the board and is sort of annoying, it is just due time to take it. We're getting rid of our really bad bishop for a good knight. Good dealio. DE, queen g3. Now, whenever there's a pawn on e4 and your knight is on e5, there's something that you need to worry about. And that is the health of that pony. But Pillsbury notes that he always has knight g4 whenever f6 happens, and the knight will have a good hiding place on f2. So he will have a second chance to survive. f6, and the knight runs away. Now, if they would go h5, which is a typical way, mind you, to trap the knight, white doesn't really need to worry too much. Just play f5. And if f6, you always have this escape square on g6. Thank you for the follow, GM Benjamin Feingold. Thank you for the follow. So now the knight on g6 escaped, and this is terrible. Just simply terrible for black, because he has this terrible bishop staring at its own pawns, while white has a good pony. Lulaman, thank you for the follow. Why queen g3 and not queen h3? Asks Arjun. Well, if you go h3, you don't put pressure on that g7 square. Also, you don't support ideas such as knight g6. There's nothing wrong with queen h3, but there's nothing right with queen h3. You're not really threatening g4 at the moment, as you would just, you don't want to jump around with your king, but after f6, you lose that piece and the game. So queen h3 here doesn't make much sense, but queen g3 does, as you put pressure on the g7 square, and as I showed you previously, you also promote the idea of playing knight g6, which is a key concept in this structure. So let's go back. f6, knight g4. Also, there's this cheapo, of course, as mentioned by chat. Knight takes f6 check is threatened. Let's see if Tarash falls for it. So close. So close. He doesn't fall for that trick. Wow. I thought Tarash was a worse player. Nope. Tarash is strong. There. So, let's stop here and wonder what should we be doing in this position. Now we have a knight on g4. Doesn't do much. Doesn't really do too much there. Also, do we have any hopes and prospects for this pony on e2? Let's think about it. Not a little bit, a lot. Where would we love to put that pony? First off, if we want outposts, where could we create an outpost for that horse? Me thinking loud. You should be thinking out loud as well. f4. But there's a pawn right there. If there's a pawn right there, what can we do to make it an outpost? Let's push the pawn. Let's push it. Yeah. In fact, f5 has a double purpose. One of them is to create this beautiful outpost, which is supported by the charger pawn. And also it limits this knight. Before that, this knight could hop around and maybe get to d5. But after f5, that's a no-go zone. It's somewhere you can't go to. While I also create a nice little spot for the pony. Queen d7, rook f1. Still, we don't want to drop a pawn. We're grandmasters. We're on the side of Pillsbury. He ain't dropping no pawns. Rook d8, rook f4. And this is surprising, right? Well, sometimes you have to mix your plans. You can't go knight f4, because queen takes f5. And you're greedy. You don't want to give up pawns for free. Therefore, he goes rook f4. Now, it's interesting. There was another American player in the 1900s who was famous for his attacking chess. His name escapes me. Chat, can you help me? Who was that attacking genius? He was a lawyer. Yes, Murphy. Exactly. So apart from Murphy, it is not that well known, but Pillsbury was also an attacking genius. So if you have that in mind, what could be the concept behind this move of rook f4? What is Pillsbury devising here? Murpheus. Yes, Arjun. Murpheus. And also an interesting tidbit. I did research if Murphy ever played Pillsbury, and it turns out, no, they never did. Which is sad, because both of them were amazing attacking players. Let's try to make legal moves, Arjun. Legal, meaning this rook cannot fly over. This rook cannot fly over this knight. You want to make it legal. Jen Shahade, thank you for following and welcome. So the idea is correct, but you've got to prepare it. Like an eventual plan. So let's make it more legitimate. So what would you play before flying over this pony? Well, obviously, you will play knight f2, rook h4, queen h3, and voila, you are putting up some sort of a battery on that king. Queen d6, queen h4, which is kind of strange. I would love to go this way, knight f2 and rook h4. Just pressing on that h7 pawn, and go knight f4 and knight g6. But he played queen h4. Again, change of plans. Rook e8, knight c3. And if you think about it, the rook is on f4, the knight is on c3, queen is on h4. Can you guess what Pillsbury is trying to do now? He's actually being very sneaky about it. It's seen that he's trying to do a king's side attack. King's Indian. King's side attack. But in fact, he has something else in mind. Well, sacking doesn't really work right now because the queen is over defending the f6 square. So this knight is bothering this pawn on e4. Same thing. Same thing. He's trying to capture the e4 pawn, or at least pressure it. Bishop d5, sort of a stabilizing move, but I'm not a big fan. Probably b4, bishop d5 would be a little better. Bishop d5, but it's Taras. He knows what he's doing. Knight f2, and suddenly you can see the plan of Pillsbury unfolding. Queen c6, and another maneuvering time coming. Rook f1 is bringing all the pieces towards the king, and maybe if that rook moves, you can move the other rook to f4, b4, knight e2, queen a4, knight g4. What if I just take this pawn? I don't understand. I thought Taras respects pawns. Why didn't he take? What's wrong with him? It's a free pawn. Just take it. Just take the pawn. These 1900s. They don't respect pawns at all. Or maybe he respected Pillsbury's tactical genius. Boom. Because you can't take, queen takes f6. If you go king g8, I have rook g4, and you get mated. But maybe there's rook g7. Is that the truth? Chat, is that the truth? Rook g7 almost holds. Close. But not quite close enough. Because rook g4, you have to over-defend, and your queen is far away. You'd love to teleport that queen to g8, but that's highly illegal. You would have to jump over those two pieces, and then it would reach g8. Rook e7, but then unpri, and you're losing. So even though we hail Murphy as that fantastic tactical player, Pillsbury was no slouch himself. So Taras decides to sidestep and just defend that pawn first. Rook f2, seemingly defensive, but in fact he's just preparing this knight f4, knight g6 ideas. So again, if takes, there's knight f4 hitting the bishop, and when you move here, knight g6, hello people. And if you take, again, you are inviting white to go for a mating attack. So he doesn't take, he hides from this knight f4, knight g6 concept. Knight c1, defending now, which is a little passive, but sometimes defense is warranted. c3, b3, just closing off the queen side. Queen c6. So far, a very balanced game. He goes h3, which is, at first sight, looks ridiculous. But what could be his concept behind this move? Any ideas? This is a tricky move. It seems like your casual luft, but it ain't. It ain't a luft. It's more than a luft. Always think about game plans. Once the position closes down and you get these strategic type of positions, you've got to look for big attacking ideas. Rick Descartes, 79, thank you for following. So one thing is to remaneuver the knight to h2. What else does h3 prepare? Because by in itself bringing back to the knight to h2 isn't such a big deal. Let's be honest, okay? By itself, we'd say, okay, you brought your knight back. Big deal. Big dealio. You're not interested. There's a bigger idea there. Yep. He's actually preparing the typical thing that I always say in these positions. And I know it's a Freudian slip, but it's true. White is playing sort of King's Indian style. And he's going to throw g4, g5. And then the villain, this knight, shall come back from h2 to g4 yet again to pressure on the f6 pawn. So that is the big plan of Pillsbury. a5, knight h2. Now this plan is coming, a4. Do we care about this attack on the queen side? Do we honestly care if we lose pawns or our opponent queens, or he promotes pawns to knights? Nope, we do not care at all. There's only one thing we care about, and that is, chat. What is that, chat? What do we care about? Schach und Matt. That is the only thing we care. Indeed. So g4. Geronimo. Let's go. AB. AB. We capture it back just out of duty. And also we do that automatically. Rook a8. g5. Let's go. Let's go. Rook a3. Can we defend that b3 pawn? We don't care. I forgot. We don't care. Knight g4. And note that we're pressing down that f6 pawn. That's also not our only threat. What is our other threat apart from attacking that f6 pawn? What else are we threatening? Dear Chatterino. g6, yes. That typical King's Indian idea. Bishop takes b3. Oh no, our pawn is gone. No, so sad, so sad. Now, we talked about g6. We talked about gf, as we have pressure there. But we didn't talk about a third thing. And this is something we know since Paul Karras. If you see a good move, you should look for a better one. So we see two concepts, and that's good. And all fun and cheers. Let's look for an even better one. And if you do so, you might be able to channel your inner Pillsbury. Rook g2. So Pillsbury is kind of playing patiently. Why is Rook g2 so strong? Well, for two reasons. One, you still have the threat of taking f6. In fact, this would be decisive. So let's say bishop c4. The rook is hanging. We don't care, because you can't really capture back because of this new pin that we just created. Also, if you take, I can take on e7 and you'll be crying tears. But you know what? Let's do it in style. We can even go knight h6 check. King h8. F takes g7. Rook takes, and queen d8. And you get mated. So rook g2 is a very powerful move, because not only does it threaten g takes f6, it also threatens ideas of g6, and after g takes h7, you'll have these knight h6 and knight takes f6 ideas similar to the ones that we saw in these lines. So Tarash is in big trouble. King h8. Just trying to hide the king. But does this deter Mr. Pillsbury? Not at all. Not at all. It is time to go for the decisive attack. So, whenever you're playing chess, one thing is to look for your own solutions. Rook g2 was looking for your own solution. We said, okay, I want gf to open it up for my knight, or g6. When our opponent played king h8, what was Tarash trying to achieve? So the line was previously takes, here knight h6, takes, and queen d8. So when Tarash played king h8, what did he sidestep? So always assume that your opponent knows what she is doing. So what is king h8 trying to achieve? It sidestepped the pin. That's one thing. What is the other thing that king h8 achieved? Do we have checks once we take or play g6? Can we use this pin anymore? Not really. So we've got to give credit for Tarash for sidestepping. Now it's time to punish him though. So once we played rook g2, that kind of assumed we want to open up the file, this g file. So naturally the move is g takes f6. We want it opened. G takes f6, which I don't quite like. I would like knight takes f6 a bit more. Although that runs into knight e5. And again, it's going to be fork down and sad faces everywhere, because not only your queen is attacked, knight g6 fork is coming, and you're losing. So Tarash had to make the sad decision of taking on f6. But now, it is time to take down the legendary Siegbert Tarash. Knight h6, of course. But first, we take and remove this defender. Knight h6 now. Actually, we have a big threat on g8. So, Tarash has only one move. Rook g7. Just blocking. Otherwise, you would lose your lady and probably the game. Rook g7. And here comes a legendary idea by Mr. Harry Nelson Pillsbury. So whenever your opponent's defending and you have more attackers than defenders, it is quite logical that you want to get rid of those defenders so you hugely outnumber your opponent's pieces. So rook takes g7 actually is the first logical move here. The question is how to continue with the attack. Now, mind you, we are losing on the other side of the board. Yes, we don't care. That's true, we don't care. But on the other hand, we need to be quick. Tarash is 2 moves away from queening. And if he does queen, we're going to be in big trouble. So let's channel our inner Pillsbury and try to find out the big solutions here. So rook takes g7 is obviously the first move. King takes g7. And here, Pillsbury comes up with something spectacular. It's white to move and win. Rook f4 is an idea, yeah. What else? Rook f4 is interesting. You're trying to bring in the rook, I presume. Yeah, that's one way of playing. Let's look for more. King h1. So we have king h1, rook f4. Many interesting ideas. I guess both wants to bring the rook in the game. But don't forget, time is of essence. If Tarash can run away with the king, we're doomed. Now, you don't want to be doomed, right? I don't think you want to be. No, you don't. No, you don't. So the third option is queen g3 check. Okay. Now, does the king on g7 have any defenders? That's a simple yes and no question, mind you. Or queen h5. Well, who's defending that king? Any pieces around? No. No one's there. No one's there, just pawns. Pawns are not pieces. I mean, they're pieces, but they're lightweight. Not heavyweight guys like that rook. And rooks and ladies. So, if the king is naked and has no defenders, it's time to attack like a madman. Queen g3 check. Brilliant. In fact, by itself doesn't look that fantastic. But the thing is the phone. You can't go king f8. You can't run away because I'll check you and you say bye-bye to the rook. Down rook, bye-bye Tarash. You're losing. So you can't go back there because you get smotherinoed. It's just checkmate. So there's only one thing that you can do. King takes h6. Now comes the big question. Can we checkmate with a lone queen? Nope, you can't. You need little helpers. You don't have little helpers, you ain't winning. Rook f4. So we want to go rook h4. Okay. What if I check you on b1? So rook f4, rook h4, rook b1. I'm gonna fight. I'm Tarash. I fight. I don't want to lose. 9. So whenever you're trying to checkmate, always envisage the mate, the mating pattern. Where will the mate land? h7? No. That's a bit too far-fetched. That's unlikely. So this king is sort of stuck on h6. If you can keep this king on the h-file, well, maybe you can expect the mate to be on which square? Which square, people? It's important. Mating patterns are probably the most important part in chess. Which square? Not the move, people, the square, you know. This is a move, this is a square, right? h4. Yes, h4 will be the mating square. So rook f4, h4 would have been a very interesting idea. Unfortunately, this leads to a draw because I check you and I'll keep checking you until you come too close. And then the queen will take you and you lose the game. But Pillsbury had this beautiful little sidestepping move, king h1. The threat being rook g1, queen h4. Very elegant. You can't do anything against it, apart from losing your queen, but then it's game over. And fantastically enough, you can't do anything. You don't have a check because you have that nasty pawn on e4 and it's in the way. Knight f8, knight g6 doesn't help you because I'm just going to take it and then you get mated. But for some of you who wanted to mate on g6, congrats, you can mate there as well. And before the queen could come closer, I will just mate you there. So let's say here, 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 and there's mate here. Very, very elegant solution by Pillsbury. So we play queen d5, rook g1, queen takes f5, and it all seems safe. He thought that all is safe, but he was wrong. Let's find the final touch by Pillsbury, and then he will cash in. Yep. Classical queen h4 check, just forcing that queen to a worse square, queen h5, queen f4 check, and again, the rook and queen is a good duo. And you're losing the lady. Rook takes, f takes, check, you lose the knight, king h5 takes, c2, and it's almost promoting. It's almost promoting there. Oh no, it's promoting. Oh no, mate. And that is sort of the reason. Yeah, if you check, go here. No difference, you still get mated. It's a beautiful, beautiful attacking game by Pillsbury. Are you impressed, Chet? I am. And guess who else was impressed by Harry Nelson Pillsbury? A guy from Norway. Let's see how impressed he was as he followed the footsteps of the legendary player. Yep, Magnus actually knows about Pillsbury. That's why you know your chess history, people. Let's see how he uses the Pillsbury attack himself. So, this game was played between Carlsen and Bardur on Birkisson. Let's see how Magnus uses this attack. c4. This is a Nimzo, but it will turn into this Pillsbury attack. Once you have a knight supported with both of the pawns on d4 and f4, you get into this Pillsbury stuff. Knight d7, f4. Now, this knight is super well protected. We can go for attacks, but Bardur doesn't want to get checkmated. I wonder why. So selfish. So selfish. It's crazy. So, Birkison, knowing that White might want to checkmate, he goes for the classical way of stopping this Queen F3, Queen H3 attack. How can you do that, dear chat? Well, of course, by getting a Pillsbury Knight yourself. And he played Knight E4. So this is sort of a fight between two Pillsbury Knights. But in fact, Knight E4 here is a little early. Now, do we tolerate Pillsbury Knights? Well, if we can get rid of them, we get rid of them. Just a side note, you don't really want to take on E5 because you activate my rook and I have a clear target on H7 after F takes E5. Also a good central control. But Knight E4 isn't that perfecto in this position. Here, you have the option of getting rid of that Pillsbury Knight. And Carlsen obviously does so, takes DE, Bishop C4. So let's take stock. What did Carlsen achieve? Well, he has a dominating knight on E5, kind of targeting that F7 pawn. What does Black have? A terrible bishop, just staring at its own pawns. Not good. And also, as Sphinxy points out, Queen B3 can become nasty, double attacking this bishop and the pawn on F7, building a true battery. Queen E7, kind of anticipating that and playing against it. So, Carlsen is going to go for something that is well known for Carlsbad structures. What is that? What was Carlsen hoping to do in this position? If you're familiar with the Carlsbad, you might know what he played here. It's the minority attack. Minority attack. Psst, 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 psst. Minority attack. What did Carlsen do? He went A3 and B4. Why did he go A3, B4? Well, he's grabbing space, and in the near future, you might even want to go A4, A5, kind of bothering Black's structure and trying to break through after Queen B3, Bishop D2, A4, A5. A3, B4 by itself is not the minority attack, but Queen B3, Bishop D2, A4, A5 would be qualified as a minority attack. Knight F6, Bishop B2. In fact, he goes here, not on D2. Interesting. C6. C6 is probably a little bit passive, but probably wanted to avoid B5 ideas. Let's say King H8. B5 is also an option. A4, and oftentimes White would use that C6 square for good. So Birkison plays C6, Queen C2, B5, A5. A typical plan, but it does have a downside. Namely, there'll be weaknesses there. H3, just creating a luft, takes, Bishop takes, Rook A1. Why did Carlsen play Rook A1 here? I wonder. Well, A, he's bringing his rook to the open file. B, never forget about the F7 pawn. There could be some nasty ideas. namely knight takes f7 and such. Because if you take, your bishop is hanging and you still be pinned. So Bardur plays knight d5, covering it up. But does he manage to cover it all up? Not really. White to move and win. So first off, whenever you're looking for tactical solutions, look for loose pieces. What are black's loose pieces? The bishop on b4 is a little bit loose, although defended. So I'm not sure if that really qualifies as a loose piece. Like, seemingly this knight is well defended. But what if we remove all the defenders? What will happen then? Boom. And that's how you find the solutions in chess. So Magnus goes for this bishop, saying that, oh, your knight will be loose once that c6 pawn is weakened. So rook takes a8, rook takes a8, and queen takes c6. So he takes this way because it double attacks on the a8 rook and the knight on d5. And there was always a target there that we never forgot about. Which one is that? Well, of course, it is this guy on f7. But is black lost already? Or can black continue fighting? So both the rook and knight is attacked. Rook d8 would lose this pony. If you go rook d8, I just take. So how can you defend both the rook and the knight? That's the big question. Knight c7, indeed. So even though black's position is still bleak, this move is something to remember. You can defend both of them with the knight. Knights are tricky beasts. Bishop f7, just taking all the pawns possible. Hey there, Fuchsia. King h8. And what would you play here if you like pawns so much? You'd capture the e4 pawn. And again, as you can see, that Pillsbury knight is lording down the board majestically. With such a huge center, Carlsen is dominating. Rook f8, trying to go for trickies. Will Magnus fall for that? I wonder. Nope, he won't. But Magnus really likes to be classical. So he has a very strong on knight on e5, a good queen kind of owning the board. These guys are quite active. But does white have one more piece that's sort of completely out of play? Yeah, this bishop on b2. So how can we activate that beautiful bishop? d5, yes. Now, obviously, there are many ways to increase your advantage, but what Carlsen does whenever he gets good positions is that he's methodical. He doesn't go for tricks, he goes for the most principled ways of winning, which limits the chances for his opponent. That's why he played d5 instead of other moves. He's just making sure that all of his pieces are active. Rook f7, knight takes f7, queen takes f7, queen takes b4, knight takes d5, queen takes b5, knight takes e3. And seemingly, all is good. And there's nothing wrong with black's position. You'd think, but you're wrong. White to move and win. Channel that Carlsen. And then you'll be rewarded. Queen b8 check, of course. Queen g8, that's the only move. But there's a very, very nice little sneakalicious move. But it is just too delicious not to be played. Boom! An elegant little solution, sort of geometrical. Because once you take, I have a check there, and the pony is fallen. And then there's 2 pawns against 0. I mean, mathematically it's 3 pawns against 1. Takes, queen e5, and Carlsen is winning the house. And it's over. There's not much that you can do against it. And he later on won this game. Hello there, people. So what's kind of fascinating, that not only was Pillsbury a great star in the 1900s, even Magnus Carlsen follows his footsteps with the knight e5, f4 concept. So knight e5, f4 is certified legendary. By all means, spectacular. And last but not least, I wanted to show you one game that actually clinched the big tournament victory for Pillsbury. And that was against Ginsburg. This is the game Pillsbury Ginsburg. And here's the backstory. So it seemed that Pillsbury is clinching the tournament, but then it turned out that Chigorin won his game. So, even though Pillsbury felt like, okay, if I get half a point, I'm gonna clinch this event. I'll be Hastings champion, 1895. I'll be a legend. But it turned out he had to win. Guess which attack he chose? Guess which one it was? It was the Pillsbury attack, of course. So let's take a look at that clincher, because with that win, he clinched the title. So d4, and this is sort of a Schlechter. Schlechter, by the way, did play in this event. How ironic. Bishop d3, castle, knight e5. It's coming, people. The Pillsbury is a coming. dc, bishop takes c4, and you'll never guess the move that Pillsbury played here. Honestly, you can't guess it. f4, of course. The whole concept is that this knight will be very powerful, and anytime black decides to take, you take with the f-pawn, get a huge central control, and have a target on f7. Now, the only way to boot this knight from e5 is f6, but as we know it, f6 is not the move that you want to play. No, sir. Bishop e6, queen b3, just pressing on that square and the square on b7. And that is also something to remember. Whenever you move the c8 squared bishop, the white squared bishop, you lose the protector of the b7 pawn. b5 takes, 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 takes. And seemingly, this is even. But it is not quite even. Why is white a little bit better here? Any guesses? And just a reminder, this will be a win for Pillsbury. So let's talk about piece activity. That knight on e5 is still monstrous. Also, compare that to that b8 knight. It can't even go and develop to normal places. And that g7 bishop, as pointed out by Bernie, is useless. But apart from this knight, you might even be able to use that c5 square, and those pawns are sort of a little weak. This pawn would rather be on b7, but as we know, pawns do not move backwards. So knight d3. You might ask me, why do you move your knight back to d3 now? Why not bishop d2? And the answer is kind of simple. This bishop is useless. Your knight is beautiful. You act like that old witch in Cinderella. You take it away from your opponent. You gave your ugliness and take away the beauty. Takes. Knight e7, rook c8. And then black is doing kind of okay. Realizing what Günzburg had in mind, Pillsbury decides, I'm not gonna give you my slippers. I want that pony on c5. Knight d7, bishop d2, and as Sphinx said, I think, you might want to control that c5 square. Now, is one advantage or one weakness enough for victory? Chat, any ideas? Is that enough? No. It's not. Two weaknesses. You need two weaknesses. At least that is the endgame rules that we know currently. rook c8. So if Günzburg manages to over-defend this square, it'll be tough to break through. King e2. Now he brings the king in the center because it's an endgame. It should be much closer to these pawns, and if you castle, you're just bringing your king away from the action. e6, rook c1. Bishop f8, takes, rook c1. Exchanging the rooks. Takes, bishop d6. Now, our biggest hope is this square on c5. How can we take control of that square? There's actually two ways. Which one would you use? Which one would you choose, chat? a3, Jogernatier, what is your idea behind a3? To play b4. Yep, that's an idea. That's one way of solving the problem. How else can we try to own that c5 square alone? But also, remember, once you play a3, b4, you do give away the c4 square. Chess is sometimes a little bit symmetrical. But the other way is to get your bishop on b4 and get rid of this defender. And there'll be one big difference. You'll get the control of the c5 square, while if black goes knight b6, you'll always have b3 to kick out that kick out that knight from c4 or a4. So bishop d2 is a big move by Pillsbury. King f8, bishop b4, bishop c5. Even stronger. Because if you take on c5, I'll take with the pawn and create a protected passed pawn, which will give me a big advantage. a6, b4 now. What's the big difference? You can go to b6 because I'll take you. And anytime you take on c5, I'll take with the d pawn and get a protected pass pawn. But remember, by itself, that will not win you the game. So we will have to look for some other solutions as well. f6. How can we break through in this position? So we already have a strong bishop on c5. Where can we find a potential target in black's camp? f6, by the way, might have been sort of a mistake because it loosened this firm structure. Can we undermine this e6 pawn? Can we win that e6 pawn? That is the question I'm asking. Not really. But if we can undermine this guy, the d5 pawn will become extremely weak. So he goes g4 with the idea of playing f5 in the future, and once you exchange off the e6, g6 pawns, you can get close to that pawn. And if you can win that, a6 becomes weak and you can win the game. Bishop takes. Now how should we capture? We obviously take with a pawn. dc is fine, that's what I would want to do. But Pillsbury takes with the b pawn. Knight b8. He is trying to build a blockade. But is he in time? Is he in time to build the blockade? Nope. Just a little bit too slow. And again, whenever you're trying to find a solution here, and you're watching this in the future, once you started a plan, make sure you follow through. Following through is very important. So whenever you're playing knight b4, that wasn't part of your plan. Also, knight b4, I have a5 and get knight c6, and it'll be kind of tough to win that game. And remember, whenever you're playing chess, you have that thing called score sheets. So if you don't remember what you were trying to achieve, look at your score sheet and look up the idea. f5, yes. Why do we play f5? Well, of course, once there'll be lots of exchanges, knight f4, and Pillsbury's thematic play would work out in this case, because you'd win the pawn, and with two connected passed pawns, you're winning the game. So, as you can see, Pillsbury is following through with his plan of g4, f5. g5. Now he plays knight b4. No longer can you move this pawn because the d5 is hanging. But Günzburg plays a5, saying, hey, what do you want with this pony? And Pillsbury is going to show him what he's about to do. White to move. And win. So let's try to calculate, because calculation is paramount in this type of position. c6, you say. Alright. If I take, you have c7 attacking the knight and queening. Yep, that's winning. If you play c6, what if I stop you with king d6? So if you play c7, my king will just take. So c6, it was played. King d6. Remember, your knight is a hanging. I see you want to take on e6, but I take on b4. And just gonna chill. I have an extra piece. What do you want? What do you want from me? Well, if you lose a piece, Monil, then you lose the game. Unless what, chat? Unless e7. Now it's important you play e7. If you play c7, I take you, you go here, ha, and you lose the game successfully. After e7, sad times are coming for black. Why? Because the knight cannot stop. It's just too far away. It takes 1, 2, 3 moves to block that square. Takes. And now c7, and no one's gonna stop you now. Because if king d7 takes, and you lost. And either I'm taking or promoting. And with a dumb knight like that, you can't do anything with it. And it's just losing. So Günzburg decided to take on c6 instead. Takes. And again, it seems, okay, I'm just gonna take the e6 pawn. But Pillsbury is a good calculator, and he expected this turn of events. Can you save the e pawn? Yangal, thank you for the follow. E4? Why do you? I just take that pawn. What's the big dealio with E4? So E4, I take that pawn. My pawn. D5, and yes. The problem is, these are connected fellows. If you take, I promote. And it's over. King D6, King E3. And funnily enough, this king is stuck. You can't go running away to the other side. I queen, so it's stuck there defending this square. B4, boom. A4 here, King D4. And when you would play B3, I can go here, walk up, capture it all, and just win the endgame. H5, hoping for the best, but G takes H5, and the pawn is just promoting. And after few sad tries by Günzburg, the game ends because King A3, King C4, stopping this B3 move, F5, H6, F4, H7. Black resigned here because after F3, you're just too far away from promoting, and I'm just going to capture them all like I should. And with that, Pillsbury was crowned the champion of 1895, which is no mean feat, being in front of Chigorin, Lasker, Tarash, Steinitz, basically everybody of his time. Sadly, he passes on too early, and that's why he never becomes a world champion. But apart from Morphy, he was one of those legendary players who have something to remember it for. 1895 is a legendary victory of Mr. Pillsbury, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this spiel on the Pillsbury attack. I hope to see you guys next time as well, because on Friday we're going to have a special with Mr. Ilya Nizhnik. So come on by, because we're going to have some anniversary party coming up. So I hope you enjoyed it. Do check us out on our social media. And with that, I'm passing the torch to Anna Maya. Hope you guys had fun, and see you guys next time. With that, enjoy the games of Pillsbury. Enjoy attacking with the Pillsbury attack. Bye bye.